And we are going to be reading in Luke chapter 23 this week, finding our way to the end of the Gospel
And the
of Luke.
climax.
Yeah, well, we're in the middle of that right
Yeah.
now. If you want the big idea for Luke 23, it is really the conclusion of the death story.
Right.
So, kind of walking through the pieces of that, we have these trials that cover the first 25 of verses of a lengthy chapter.
Right.
And pay attention to the back and forth as you go through there. First, he's with Pilate, and then Pilate learns from Galilee, sends him to Herod.
Right.
I think maybe trying to shift some responsibility
Absolutely.
there, and then back to Pilate again, and then picking up verse 26, we begin making our way to the cross.
Right.
And in the middle of that, a warning.
Yes. Which we've been dealing with for the past couple of chapters, past couple of weeks, in which Jesus has been laying out the destruction and punishment that Jerusalem is facing for their disobedience and their rejection, and now especially as he's going to his death because Jerusalem's rejection is complete now of him. He certainly, tells those mourning his fate to really weep for themselves because of the judgment they're bringing down upon themselves.
No surprise either that he would say this at this point, because
No.
the rejection at least of the original religious establishment has been so crystal clear
That's right.
up to this point, and
Well,
so no surprise.
That's right. And especially even, those trials at the beginning of this chapter, the emphasis over and over again, both Pilate and Herod, they know he's innocent. This is an innocent
Right.
man being put to death because of a mob's bloodlust.
Well, and then picking up at 32, we actually have the record of his death
Right.
by crucifixion.
Right.
And then finally in verse 50, we have the details of his burial. Now, one spot in there that may, at least for some, pose a problem has to do with the men crucified with
Right,
him.
the two
So,
thieves.
yeah, so in our story, in verse 40, you have one of them that appears to be sympathetic to Jesus.
Right.
And in other accounts, they're both critical of Jesus, which has led some to conclude, well, there are two different stories.
Right.
This is another example of a Bible contradiction.
Right. No, and I think we can do better than that. I mean, part of what you have to understand is no one gospel necessarily is telling, everything that happened every time. And part of what happens with these thieves is, I think, just like the Roman centurion, who winds up confessing this is the Son of God, it's where in the timeline of the death of Jesus are we talking about with when different thieves say different things. I think you can account for the discrepancy or the seeming discrepancy that way. In other words, maybe they both start out mocking him,
Right.
but as the crucifixion progresses and Jesus is saying things like, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," or and showing such grace and mercy towards his tormentors, or then everything goes dark for 3 hours. As they're witnessing this, maybe I think the right way to account for it is one of those thieves begins to realize, like the Roman centurion who's also overseeing this is a different man. This is an innocent man, and God is angry. He begins to realize God is upset at what is happening. This is a righteous man being put to death.
It's a great opportunity to point out that you don't have a contradiction simply because two accounts
Are different.
say different
That's right.
things.
That's right.
You have a contradiction when they say things that both of which cannot
That's right.
be true.
Are truly contradictory.
And in this case, and it's important to mention that because we see that all the time with alleged contradictions. Well, this writer focuses on this writer comments on that.
Right.
It's not a contradiction between the two. It actually may be complementary where they're
Right.
filling out the details of the story. And I think that's what we have here. And so, just as a broader warning and application, be careful about people alleging a contradiction. Often, what really is happening is they're complementing each other and giving a fuller story. Last thing I think is really helpful to pay attention to here is the evidence that is supplied in this account. I mean, not only is this the climactic moment of the gospel story, as you said, but it's the most important event in human history, and certainly
Right.
most important to Christianity. As
Right.
Paul would say in 1 Corinthians 15, everything rises or falls with the resurrection of Jesus, the death and resurrection
Right.
of Jesus. And so, for example, very detailed account of how he was buried, which becomes important later because people would allege that he wasn't buried; he's cast into a pit, or stories
Or the
like
disciples
that.
went to the wrong tomb.
Or the disciples went, yes, and so it's interesting that we have all these specific details
Right.
about what transpired. So this is a careful account
Right.
that and accounts for every detail related to his death. We know he was dead.
Right.
We know he was buried, and there's a detailed record of what transpired.
That's right. Little things like verse 55, where the women, followed at the tomb and saw where they laid him. Luke wants us to know they did know exactly. So that when they go back on Resurrection Sunday morning, they're not going to the wrong tomb. They know exactly where they're supposed to be and where the body's supposed to be.
So when modern critics come along and advance some of these theories about someone stealing the body, or he wasn't really dead, or they don't know where he was buried, all those kinds of things, understand that's just pure conjecture. That's people making up things that they don't know to be true.
Right.
And it stands in conflict with the historical record we do have, the detailed record of what actually transpired when Jesus died. That's where our reading will be in Luke chapter 23 this week. Hope you'll enjoy the time you spend in this great chapter.